"Excuse me, sir. You'll need to move." The words fell like a stone in the hushed, climate-controlled air of the first-class cabin. But it wasn't just the words, it was the way they were said. The smile was tight. The tone was syrupy sweet, yet sharp enough to cut skin. Amber Collins, flight attendant for Skylux Airlines, stood stiffly at the aisle. Her hands were clasped in front of her like a teacher about to scold a child. But the man in seat 2A was no child. And this was no ordinary request. Derrick Cole, black, sharply dressed, eyes scanning the final notes of a keynote he was about to deliver, looked up. Confusion flickered across his face. Not anger. Not fear. Just quiet confusion. He had boarded early. He had paid in full. He had confirmed his platinum status twice at check-in. So why was he being asked to move? Behind Amber stood Charlotte Hayes, white, blonde, wearing a cream-colored Chanel suit and tapping her designer watch like time owed her an apology. "I always sit there," she muttered, just loud enough for the other passengers to hear. "It's practically my seat." A ripple of discomfort moved through the cabin. Passengers looked up from their phones and their champagne. The air shifted. Something wasn't right. Derrick calmly reached into his leather wallet and produced his platinum member card. "I am a platinum member," he said evenly. "And this is my assigned seat." Amber's smile faltered. For a brief moment, a flicker of surprise crossed her face, just long enough to betray the truth: she hadn't expected him to belong. "I understand, sir," she replied, her tone now cooler, more clipped, "but this particular seat is usually reserved for our more loyal customers. Ms. Hayes here flies with us weekly. More loyal. More deserving. More white." The implication was crystal clear. Derrick Cole didn't belong in 2A, not because of any booking error, but because of who he was, how he looked, and what they assumed he wasn't. And then, it happened. Phones emerged. Slowly, almost reverently. One by one, passengers began to record. Not because they thought it would go viral. Not yet. But because something about this moment demanded to be documented. Witnessed. Preserved. Amber shifted nervously. Charlotte's eyes darted between Derrick and the gathering lenses, suddenly aware that her quiet entitlement might not remain so quiet after all. But it was already too late. The man they tried to erase. What Amber and Charlotte didn't know, what no one on that plane yet knew, was that Derrick Cole wasn't just a well-dressed black man in first class. He was the founder and CEO of Novamind Technologies, a $2.8 billion AI company that specialized in uncovering racial bias in customer service systems. The irony of the moment was almost poetic, if it hadn't been so infuriating. The man they were trying to erase from seat 2A had built his life on giving people like them nowhere to hide. He had grown up in South Side Chicago, in a 2-bedroom apartment that shook every time the train passed. At 11, while his friends played video games, Derrick taught himself to code on a second-hand desktop that overheated if left on too long. By 16, he was designing machine learning algorithms for local businesses. By 20, he had made his first million. But money had never been the goal. Justice was. When his father was shot and killed by a stray bullet during a street robbery gone wrong, Derrick had stood over his casket and made a promise. They won't ignore us forever. Today, he had chosen seat 2A for a reason. It was quiet. Spacious. Near the aisle. He was headed to San Francisco to deliver the keynote at the Global Ethics in Technology conference. He had practiced the speech a dozen times. Memorized the data. Chosen every word with surgical precision. But what he hadn't accounted for was this. A white woman with entitlement woven into her skin. A flight attendant with a mortgage and an easy target. A supervisor with too much power and too little conscience. And a plane full of passengers is about to witness something far more powerful than a software demo or a TED Talk. They were about to witness karma board a plane. The setup begins. As Derrick sat quietly, returning his ID to his wallet, he noticed Charlotte whispering something into Amber's ear. It wasn't just a whisper, it was a transaction. A folded bill. A bribe. A nod. Amber's face flushed, but she pocketed the money with the practiced grace of someone who'd done this before. Seconds later, Logan Pierce, the flight supervisor, appeared. Tall. Square-jawed. Wearing authority like a badge. "Sir," he said, voice loud enough to alert half the cabin, "we need you to move to accommodate a VIP passenger. Please don't make this difficult. Don't make this difficult." Another code phrase. Another dog whistle. Derrick looked up, calm as ever. His tone never shifted. "I've paid for this seat. It is my assigned seat. I'm not moving." Logan's lips curled. "Sir, this isn't about payment. It's about priority." That's when passengers started recording. The seat dispute had evolved. It wasn't about legroom anymore. Or boarding status. It was about something deeper. Older. More dangerous. To most of the first-class passengers staring in awkward silence, Derrick Cole was just another suit in a high-end seat, a well-groomed man, dignified in posture, perhaps a lawyer, maybe an executive. But no one, not even those tasked with escorting him off the plane, truly understood who they were dealing with. Until that moment. Until he didn't flinch. Until he simply said, "I'm not moving." 6 syllables. Spoken without fire, yet strong enough to shatter the quiet grip of discrimination wrapped in polite corporate tones. What no one on that plane could see, as Derrick sat unmoved with his fingers still resting gently on his tablet, was the fire that had fueled him since childhood. He had long ago learned how to make calm look effortless, how to respond to a world that questioned his presence not with rage, but with relentless preparation. Because Derrick Cole had always been underestimated. He was 11 when he first felt it. The teacher laughed when he said he wanted to be a computer scientist. The neighbors who assumed the thick glasses meant he was trying to act white. The old security guard at the library watched him more closely than the actual shoplifters. He had grown up in South Side Chicago, in a crumbling apartment complex where opportunity didn't knock, it sprinted past your window and hoped you were fast enough to catch it. But Derrick wasn't fast. He was quiet. Focused. Obsessed. While kids his age memorized rap lyrics and NBA stats, Derrick was memorizing C++ syntax and JavaScript functions. He had discovered a discarded desktop in a local pawn shop, the kind with a yellowed monitor and a hard drive that whined when it booted, and convinced the owner to let him take it home for $30 and a promise to clean the back room for a month. That old computer became his world. He wrote simple programs at first, calculators, quizzes, games that crashed every other run. But with each crash came a new solution. He didn't just learn to code, he learned to think like a system. Find the flaw. Fix the bias. Optimize. By age 14, he was building websites for local barbershops and corner stores. At 17, he had won a citywide competition for a predictive analytics tool he created to track school supply shortages across public schools. The local news ran a story about him, "Teen coder wants to fix Chicago schools." No one followed up. At 19, he dropped out of Northwestern University after 1 year. Not because he couldn't keep up, he had finished most of the upper-level coursework in his first 2 semesters, but because he had already outgrown the system. College couldn't teach him what he didn't already know. And besides, he had a promise to keep. Derrick was 16 when his father, Raymond Cole, was killed. Not in a gang fight. Not in a drug deal. But at a gas station, buying milk on the way home from his second job. Wrong place. Wrong time. A robbery gone wrong. The bullet was meant for someone else. At the funeral, Derrick didn't cry. He stood at the casket, placed his hand gently on the wood, and made a vow. I'll make them see us. I'll build something they can't ignore. That promise didn't start with protests. It started with code. From a one-bedroom apartment he shared with his mother, Derrick built the prototype for what would become Novamind Technologies, an AI platform designed to detect bias in customer service systems. He had seen firsthand how discrimination wasn't always loud. Sometimes it came with a smile. Sometimes it wore a suit. But it was always there, in how long you waited on hold, how they spoke to you, how your complaint was handled. Novamind's first real client was a regional bank in Minnesota that wanted to understand why customers of color reported lower satisfaction rates despite identical transaction histories. Derrick's software revealed a pattern: employees were 3 times more likely to suggest alternatives to non-white customers asking for premium services. Novamind offered the client a chance to fix it. Word spread. Quietly at first. Then louder. Within 5 years, Novamind was servicing over 200 companies across North America. Tech firms. Airlines. Healthcare systems. Insurance giants. By age 34, Derrick Cole was a billionaire. But you wouldn't know it looking at him. He didn't buy a mansion in Malibu or a gold-plated Tesla. He still lived in the city. Still walked the same streets. Still tipped service workers 50% and held the elevator for janitors. Power hadn't changed him. It had sharpened him. That morning, he had flown to LAX on a private charter but chosen Skylux Airlines for the short hop to San Francisco. He wanted to observe their first-class customer experience. What he got instead was a lesson in irony. The airline he was quietly evaluating for a $50 million AI partnership, the very one he had been buying shares of for 2 years, had just tried to kick him out of his seat because they didn't recognize him. They had no idea he owned 25% of their stock. Earlier that day, before the confrontation, Derrick had been spotted by security cameras helping an elderly woman lift her suitcase. He had guided her gently to her gate, waited as she found her boarding pass, and thanked the airline staff by name as he walked through the terminal. Not because anyone was watching. But because that was who he was. He smiled at strangers. Held doors. Tipped the airport cafe barista in cash and told her to buy herself something good later. Kindness wasn't performative. It was policy. Now, as Amber Collins stood flustered beside his seat, lips pursed around some carefully rehearsed policy about frequent flyers and preferred passengers, Derrick didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He just looked her in the eye and said again, "I have my boarding pass. I'm a platinum member. I'm in my seat." It wasn't the volume of the words, it was the weight. But weight, it seemed, was not enough. Charlotte Hayes, the woman who had started all this, was still standing in the aisle, fuming with exaggerated sighs. "I always sit there," she announced to no one in particular. "This is ridiculous. I have a meeting after landing." Logan Pierce appeared moments later, carrying himself like a man sent to restore order, unaware he was stepping into a trap of his own making. "We can do this the easy way or the hard way," he whispered, trying to intimidate Derrick into surrender. Derrick didn't blink. Behind Logan, Charlotte reached into her coat pocket and slipped a folded stack of cash into Amber's hand. It was fast. Subtle. But not invisible. 3 phones caught it. Amber flushed. And the moment stopped being about a seat. Now, it was evidence. Derrick said nothing. Not yet. He simply opened his camera app and began to record. The power dynamic had shifted. Amber's smile faded. Logan's voice cracked. Charlotte clutched her designer bag a little tighter. And the internet was watching. For a brief second, the cabin of Flight 4722 fell silent, not the calm silence of a luxury airline, but the crackling stillness before a storm tears the sky open. Derrick Cole had begun recording. His hands steady, his voice calm, his message crystal clear. I want to be very clear about what's happening. I am being asked, threatened, to give up the seat I booked, paid for, and was assigned, to accommodate another passenger's preference. I am a platinum member. I have not been disruptive. I have not broken any policy. I am being asked to move because I don't fit their idea of who belongs here. A few passengers across the aisle glanced at one another, their eyes wide. The woman in seat 2C subtly angled her phone to record, too. The man behind Derrick lowered his reading glasses and stared openly. The power dynamic had shifted in real time. What had started as a silent injustice had now become a public event. Charlotte Hayes, still clutching her bag like it was the crown jewels, scoffed dramatically. "This is outrageous," she said with exaggerated offense. "I've never been treated this way. I'm a loyal customer. I have status." From her tone, you'd think she'd been attacked, not merely inconvenienced by the presence of a black man in a luxury seat she felt entitled to. But the cabin wasn't buying it. A low murmur rippled from row to row. The passengers weren't just watching anymore. They were choosing sides. And they weren't picking hers. Logan Pierce, the flight supervisor, had miscalculated. He'd walked into the situation assuming authority would shield him. That Derrick, like so many others, would eventually fold. Maybe out of discomfort. Maybe out of fear. Maybe just to make it all go away. But Derrick Cole wasn't folding. Logan's patience snapped. He leaned closer to Derrick, his voice lowered but audible in the tense quiet of the cabin. "Recording is not permitted, sir." Derrick didn't flinch. "There's no federal law against recording on a commercial aircraft unless it interferes with crew duties," he said, gaze steady. "And I'm simply documenting the interaction for my protection." That response, measured, lawful, confident, rattled Logan in a way no shouting ever could. He hesitated. His eyes narrowed, jaw tight, nostrils flared. This wasn't going as planned. In the front galley, Captain Richard Blake had been following the updates through crew whispers and escalating passenger glances. At first, he had brushed it off. Another boarding dispute. Entitlement in first class was as common as turbulence. But when Logan called him via service phone, saying, "We have a non-compliant passenger. We may need security," Blake sighed. He'd flown for 30 years. He had seen panicked travelers, belligerent businessmen, and drunk bachelorettes. He could handle another situation. He was wrong. When Captain Blake stepped into the aisle, trailed by a visibly uncomfortable Amber Collins, the cabin fell silent once again. His presence, uniformed and authoritative, was meant to restore order. Instead, it intensified scrutiny. "Sir," he began in his smooth, calculated tone, "my crew informs me there's a seating issue." Derrick looked up. The phone still rested in his lap, recording everything. His voice was firm, but respectful. "No, Captain. There's no issue. I'm seated where my ticket says I should be. I'm a platinum member. I selected this seat specifically. The issue, as far as I can tell, is that someone else wants my seat, and your team is trying to make that my problem." The captain's eyes narrowed. He wasn't used to pushback, especially not this poised, composed, and so clearly correct. Still, Captain Blake tried the company line. "Our crew has the right to reassign seats for passenger comfort and safety. This isn't personal, sir." Derrick's response was almost a whisper, but it hit like thunder. "It's always personal when it's only people like me who get reassigned." A gasp. Someone near the rear of first class whispered, "He's right." Charlotte stepped forward, voice rising. I have a critical meeting after this flight. I can't be crammed next to the galley like a common tourist. Passengers turned sharply. Her voice carried arrogance like perfume, suffocating and impossible to ignore. A teenager near the window rolled her eyes and muttered to her father, "She's getting cancelled." Then came the moment no one would forget. Charlotte reached into her purse. With the same sleight of hand she'd used earlier, she slipped another folded bill into Logan Pierce's jacket pocket as he stood stiffly near the captain. "Thank you for handling this," she whispered, just loud enough to be picked up by multiple recording devices. "Some people just don't understand that first class has standards." The damage was done. Derrick didn't react outwardly. He didn't have to. The videos were already compiling a narrative more damning than any lawsuit, a black man being asked to give up his seat, while a white woman handed out bribes to the flight crew. And then the footsteps came. Security. 2 uniformed airport officers stepped into the cabin, their appearance marking a terrifying new escalation. For many passengers of color, it was a familiar horror, the presence of uniformed men with the power to decide your fate in moments. Derrick sat still, dignified. One of the officers approached carefully. "Sir, we've been asked to remove you from the flight." Derrick replied without raising his voice. "Can you tell me what airline policy I've violated?" The officers exchanged glances. They had no answer. Passengers stirred. One began to speak, "He hasn't done anything wrong." Another raised her phone higher, "This is all being recorded." The younger of the 2 officers sighed and looked toward Captain Blake. The captain hesitated, then gave a single, damning phrase. "He's being removed for creating a disturbance." The cabin groaned in disbelief. But Derrick didn't argue. He gathered his things slowly. Every movement is deliberate. Every step is an act of restraint. Of control. He didn't yell. He didn't demand. He documented. As he passed Logan Pierce, he said nothing. As he passed Charlotte Hayes, her smugness was near blinding, but he didn't look at her either. But someone else did. A young woman in row 3B, still holding her phone, stepped into the aisle and followed him. "Excuse me, sir," she said when they reached the gate. "I recorded everything. From the moment they approached you. Even the money is changing hands. I couldn't just sit there. You need this. And I'll testify if needed." Her voice trembled. She was shaking. Not from fear, but from the injustice of what she had just witnessed. Derrick's voice softened for the first time that day. "Thank you. That means more than you know." Back on board, Charlotte took Derrick's seat. She leaned back like a queen ascending a throne. Amber brought her a complimentary champagne. Logan stood nearby, straightening his tie. But somewhere in the back galley, a phone rang. Urgently. At the headquarters of Skylux Airlines, a public relations director burst into the CEO's office. "Sir," she said, panic in her voice. "We have a problem. A big one." A video had already at 2 million views. The CEO, Thomas Granger, turned pale when he saw the footage. Not just because of the potential lawsuit. Not just because of the outrage. But because of who he saw in that video. "That's Derrick Cole," he whispered. "That's the man we've been courting for a $50 million partnership." "Sir," the PR director added slowly, "he owns 25% of our stock." In the boardroom on the 35th floor of Skylux Airlines corporate tower, a flat-screen monitor lit up with the viral video that was now racing through the internet like a wildfire. The room was filled with hushed executives, men and women in tailored suits, their faces drained of color, jaws clenched, fingers tapping nervously on notepads or iPads. The video played on loop. Derrick Cole, calm, composed, documenting every word. Charlotte Hayes, the entitled voice of indignation. Logan Pierce, firm and dismissive. Amber Collins, accepting folded cash. Captain Richard Blake, the final blow of disturbance. And behind every frame, truth. Crystalline. Unfiltered. Indicting. Thomas Granger, CEO of Skylux, stood stiffly near the head of the polished mahogany table. His knuckles turned white as he gripped the edge. The footage was damning, worse than anything their PR team had dealt with in the company's 30-year history. But then came the fatal blow. "Sir," Janet from Public Relations said in a shaky voice, "the passenger's been identified." Granger turned slowly. "Who is he?" "Derrick Cole." The name dropped like a brick through a glass table. "You mean, Derrick Cole Novamind?" asked one of the board members. "As in, AI systems, bias detection, Fortune 100 contracts, Derrick Cole." "Yes, sir." "That one." Granger sat down slowly, the reality hitting him with full force. "We just kicked our own largest shareholder off a plane." The room fell into stunned silence. What few in the room knew, but Granger certainly did, was that Novamind Technologies had been evaluating Skylux as a potential partner for its next-generation customer service transformation suite. A $50 million deal was nearly at the finish line. Contracts were being drafted. Site visits were scheduled. And Derrick Cole himself had been leading that evaluation from behind the scenes. Granger's voice trembled with disbelief. "He owns, how much of our stock?" Janet answered softly, "Approximately 25%, sir. Combined with his investment group, he has a controlling interest." Murmurs. Panic. One CFO stood up and started pacing. "This is catastrophic," he whispered. "He can pull out and tank us. The stock, the partners, the media, we're dead." Then, the assistant ran in breathlessly, holding out a phone. "Sir, Novamind is on the line. It's Mr. Cole." Granger's eyes widened. He took the call on speaker, the entire room holding its collective breath. "Mr. Cole," Granger began, carefully modulating his tone, "please allow me to start by expressing our deepest apologies for what occurred." "Mr. Granger," Derrick's voice cut through, calm and clear, "I appreciate your call. And your apology. But I'm not calling as a wronged passenger." The room went still. "I'm calling as your largest shareholder." A long silence. "I am demanding an emergency shareholder meeting within the next 3 hours. I expect full attendance from all senior board members." Granger swallowed hard. "Of course. We'll arrange everything." "Good," Derrick said. "Because this is no longer about a seat. It's about your entire culture." 3 hours later, as rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Skylux boardroom, the shareholders filed in like soldiers reporting for judgment. Some still in golf polos, others fresh off red-eye flights, most pale and rattled. Then the door opened. And Derrick Cole walked in. Wearing the same tailored navy suit from earlier that day, the one he'd been wearing when he was escorted off the plane. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. He didn't bring anger. He brought authority. Behind him followed Vanessa Reed, COO of Novamind, two of the firm's senior legal counsel, and Novamind's head of public ethics. The weight of their presence filled the room. Everyone stood. Some out of respect. Others out of fear. Derrick took his seat at the head of the table. Granger gestured to the monitor. "We've all seen the footage," he said quietly. We are prepared to hear your terms." Derrick didn't respond immediately. He opened a manila folder, flipped to a page, and slid it forward. "These are my terms. One demand. One decision." Granger read, eyes widening. "Effective immediately," Derrick said, voice even, "I want every Skylux employee involved in today's incident terminated. No severance. No delay. No union cover. That includes Amber Collins, Logan Pierce, and Captain Richard Blake. Granger hesitated. That may be difficult, Mr. Cole. The union. This is non-negotiable, Derrick said sharply, without raising his voice. If these people remain employed here, even another hour, I pull my investment. All of it. And I canceled the $50 million technology contract. And I make sure every partner knows exactly why. He paused. You won't survive a mass sell-off and a media storm at the same time. Make your choice. At that exact moment, a junior analyst burst into the room, breathless, waving a tablet. Sir, we're already down 12%. Market analysts predict a 30% drop by the end of the day if we don't make a public move. The ultimatum hit like a lightning bolt. The board didn't vote. They didn't need to. Granger turned to the HR director, who had been waiting quietly near the corner of the room. Terminate all three. Now. Meanwhile, 3 floors below, in a stark white conference room, Amber, Logan, and Captain Blake sat anxiously, summoned without warning. They hadn't been told why. Then the HR director walked in, followed by 2 legal representatives and 2 security officers. Amber looked up, pale. Logan crossed his arms, ready to defend himself. Captain Blake remained silent. I'll be direct, the HR director said, placing 3 folders on the table. Your employment with Skylux Airlines is terminated effective immediately. A gasp from Amber. What? We were following protocol. He was difficult. The HR rep turned her laptop toward them. The viral video played again. Bribery. Bias. A man is humiliated. Is this your version of protocol? The HR director asked coldly. Accepting bribes. Racial targeting. Abusing position. Amber broke down in tears. Logan tried to speak. We didn't know who he was. That's the problem, the legal counsel cut in. You shouldn't need to know someone's status to treat them with basic decency. Captain Blake finally spoke. I trusted my crew's judgment. I didn't know. You abdicated your responsibility, the HR director replied. The final blow came like thunder. The man you removed was Derrick Cole, CEO of Novamind, largest shareholder of this company. Their faces crumbled. Logan's bravado vanished. Amber shook silently. Captain Blake's shoulders slumped, age showing in every line of his weathered face. Security will escort you to collect your things. Back upstairs, Derrick stood before the rest of the board. This isn't just about 3 people, he said. This is about a company that treats image as culture, and compliance as values. That ends today. He gestured toward Vanessa Reed, who tapped the screen and brought up a slide deck. Effective immediately, every Skylux employee will undergo comprehensive bias and equity training designed by Novamind. No exceptions. No opt-outs. And to ensure its seriousness, I'm grounding your airline. A collective gasp. 48 hours. All flights are suspended. No operations until the first round of training is complete. Yes, it'll cost millions. But your reputation is already bleeding out. This is the only way to stop it. Granger stared, stunned. We'll lose everything. Derrick stared back. No. You'll finally learn what everything means. Outside the glass windows, the rain still fell, but inside Skylux Airlines, the storm had just begun to clear. Because the man they thought didn't belong in seat 2A? He owned the plane. By the time the sun rose over the San Francisco skyline the next morning, the name Derrick Cole had become a symbol. Not just of power. Not just of resilience. But of uncompromising justice. Overnight, the video of his removal had racked up over 12 million views. Top influencers had reshared it. Civil rights attorneys dissected it frame by frame. Morning talk shows aired it in segments, comparing it to the Montgomery bus boycott, modern injustice, same old playbook. But this time, the man removed from his seat didn't just protest. He owned the airline. And now, he was rebuilding it. At the Novamind headquarters, Derrick sat in a glass-walled conference room with Vanessa Reed and his crisis team. A war room had formed. Screens lit up with real-time analytics, mentions, sentiment charts, news clips from CNN, BBC, and The View. His voice was quiet but focused. "We don't escalate this with outrage," he said. "We escalate it with action." Vanessa nodded. "Already on it. We've drafted the new employee training protocol. 3 phases. Simulation-based. Real-time bias detection. We'll start with frontline staff and roll up to management." "And the board?" Derrick asked. "They've agreed to be first," she said, almost with a smile. "Publicly." Derrick looked at the live feed from Skylux's corporate social media. A simple black and white post. "We failed. But we are changing. All flights are suspended for 48 hours. Mandatory equity training is in progress. Led by Novamind Technologies. #SkyReform." The comments were exploding. "Never seen an airline own up this fast. About time someone shut it all down to fix it." This man didn't just clap back. He restructured the whole damn system. Across town, Charlotte Hayes sat alone in her luxury condo, curtains drawn. Her name had begun trending, not the way she wanted. Airline Karen was now a digital moniker she couldn't escape. Videos of her bribing flight staff had been slowed down, memed, and captioned. "I always sit there. First class has standards." Those words, arrogant, dismissive, were now punchlines and hashtags. Her phone had gone silent. Her company placed her on administrative leave. Her neighbors looked away in the elevator. And for the first time in her adult life, no one wanted to be associated with her name. But the story wasn't just about punishment. Inside Skylux's now silent terminals, something extraordinary was happening. Instead of wheels lifting off runways, the truth was landing in conference rooms, break areas, and training modules. The grounding. "Welcome to day 1. The speaker's voice echoed through the Skylux main training auditorium. Hundreds of employees, flight attendants, gate agents, managers, sat in neat rows, some skeptical, others silent, a few already teary-eyed. Vanessa Reed stepped forward. Behind her, the screen lit up with the Novamind logo. She didn't speak like a corporate trainer. She spoke like someone who had lived it. "You are here today not because you caused this," she said, "but because this system let it happen, and didn't stop it." Her tone sharpened. "This training isn't to make you tolerant. It's to make you aware. To make you brave. To show you what happens when small choices add up to large harms." The first module, unconscious preference and power imbalance. The second, situational integrity in customer-facing decisions. The third, allyship in real time, when silence is complicity. It wasn't passive learning. It was a confrontation. Simulation. Reflection. In a simulation room, flight attendants role-played scenarios where 2 passengers of different races requested upgrades. A hidden AI engine tracked their eye contact, tone, language, and posture. The data was unforgiving. And eye-opening. In the post-scenario debrief, one senior attendant whispered, "I didn't realize I smiled more at the white customer. I wasn't even aware." "That's the point," said the facilitator. Bias isn't always loud. It's often quiet. Polite. Professional. But it still damages. Still divides. In another room, executives were shown edited footage of actual complaint calls. Pairs of audio clips, same issue, different accents. Different results. Even the CEO, Thomas Granger, looked shaken. He turned to Derrick at one point and muttered, "We marketed ourselves as luxury for all. But we were never honest about who all really included. The consequences below the surface." Downstairs, the human cost of the incident was still unfolding. Logan Pierce sat in his apartment surrounded by unopened mail. Job rejections. Interview cancellations. His LinkedIn inbox was full, but not with offers. With public comments. "Aren't you the guy who got bribed on camera? Hope the $200 was worth your career." He had deleted the video app, but it was too late. The internet didn't forgive quickly. Amber Collins wasn't faring better. She had applied for 5 different regional carriers. All had declined. One recruiter said it plainly. "You don't represent the kind of trust our passengers need right now." She had spent years being praised for remembering passengers' favorite drinks, for soothing nervous flyers. Now, all that work vanished, because of one moment where she said nothing when she should have spoken. She finally broke her silence in a message to Novamind support inbox. "I want to join the Second Chance program, if it's real. I want to fix what I did wrong." Captain Richard Blake didn't even bother applying elsewhere. 30 years of flight hours. Gone in 3 minutes of moral abdication. He now spent his days watching news clips of the incident he was once part of, studying his own posture, his weak voice, his failure to speak up. He saw it now. Saw how his silence was louder than any command. And it haunted him. Building forward, not just back. But Derrick wasn't here to destroy careers. He was here to rebuild a culture. And that began with forgiveness, not blind, but earned. That week, Novamind officially launched the Second Chance program. A multi-phase rehabilitation model for employees terminated due to bias incidents. The program offered bias re-education with AI feedback, public acknowledgement of wrongdoing, service hours in underrepresented communities, accountability panels with affected individuals, career path restructuring. It wasn't about PR. It was about making people face themselves, and choose differently. To everyone's surprise, Logan Pierce applied. He sat across from the panel in session 1, with sweaty palms, darting eyes. But when asked to name the moment he realized he was wrong, he didn't hesitate. It wasn't when the video went viral. It wasn't when I got fired. It was then that man, Derrick, looked me in the eyes and stayed calm. Like he'd been through it before. Like he already knew I'd fold, and he was letting me prove him right. He took a breath. "I thought I was one of the good guys. But I've realized I was just convenient. And convenience is the enemy of courage." Amber attended the program quietly. She didn't speak much in the early weeks. But in one exercise, when asked to reenact the moment Charlotte slipped her the money, she burst into tears before the scene began. "I knew it was wrong," she whispered. "But I told myself, I need this job. I need the tip. I need peace." But I wasn't protecting peace. I was protecting privilege. As for Captain Blake, he returned not as a pilot but as a trainer within the program. Teaching others how hierarchy, when unchallenged, can become complicity. "I ignored my gut," he said during one session. "Because I trusted procedure over principle. And I'll spend the rest of my life undoing that." A new kind of airline. By the end of 6 weeks, Skylux Airlines didn't just recover. It transformed. Their customer feedback reports, now independently audited, included a new metric: perceived equity of treatment. For the first time in its history, the airline ranked number 1 among Black, Latino, and Asian travelers in all service categories. Vanessa Reed stood before a group of new employees on day one of orientation. She no longer had to introduce the program. They'd all heard of it. This isn't about making passengers comfortable, she told them. It's about making sure everyone belongs. Every seat. Every route. Every voice. And Derrick? He sat quietly in the back of the room that day. No announcement. No spotlight. Just watching. Because this wasn't his victory. It was everyone's second chance. On the 6-month anniversary of the incident that changed Skylux Airlines forever, a modest press conference was held, not in some flashy ballroom or on a red carpet, but inside the company's newly opened Center for Ethical Aviation. There were no champagne flutes, no celebratory speeches. Just a stage. A microphone. And Derrick Cole. He didn't wear a branded suit. He didn't read from a script. He stood there in a dark gray blazer, soft-spoken as ever, but steady. 6 months ago, I was removed from a plane for sitting in a seat I had paid for, he began, his voice echoing in the glass-paneled hall. Not because I violated any rules. But because someone else thought I didn't belong. He paused. No theatrics. Just the truth. I wasn't the first. And I won't be the last. But that moment reminded me of something important. Justice is not punishment. Justice is progress. The room fell into silence. Not the tense kind, the listening kind. He turned to the backdrop where the name of a new program had just been unveiled. Second Chance Initiative, From Error to Equity. The initiative, created through a partnership between Novamind Technologies and Skylux Airlines, was a revolutionary training and re-entry system designed not only to correct bias, but to reintegrate those who had acted in ignorance, or fear, and now sought a better path. The audience included airline employees, tech leaders, diversity advocates, journalists, and a few familiar faces now seated in the back row, subdued but present. Logan Pierce, once the enforcer of removal, is now the program's first graduate. Amber Collins, once silent during injustice, now mentors new employees on moral courage. Captain Richard Blake, no longer a pilot, but now a lecturer in ethics and leadership. All three sat side by side, eyes steady, no longer running from their past, but walking towards something new. When justice is not the end, but the beginning. After the press conference ended, Derrick quietly stepped away from the cameras. He wasn't there for the limelight. He had learned long ago that the work of justice doesn't end when the noise fades. It begins after. The Second Chance Initiative had been his vision, but its heart belonged to those who chose to enter it. Not everyone did. Some, like Charlotte Hay, refused to participate. She had declined all invitations to engage in restorative dialogue, rejected legal mediation, and was now embroiled in a civil lawsuit filed by passengers affected by her disruption. But Logan? Amber? Richard? They stepped in. And they stayed. Logan Pierce, the unraveling and reassembly of authority. Logan had once believed power came from posture and projection, stand tall, speak firmly, and control the room. But after the video of him taking cash from Charlotte Hayes spread across the internet like wildfire, his world collapsed. He lost his job. His reputation. His friends stopped returning calls. It was only when he sat across from Vanessa Reed during his first day in the program that something inside him cracked. "Do you know what I regret the most?" he asked her during one of the accountability sessions. Vanessa looked at him, withholding judgment. "I regret that I didn't feel surprised when it happened," he said quietly. "Like, some part of me had accepted that certain people get moved, and certain people stay seated. That I just did my job, and that job didn't include asking why." He spent the next 3 months in workshops, simulations, and interviews with people who had experienced similar bias, from hospitals, schools, and airports. He began to write a journal, and then volunteered to be recorded for a training film now used internally at Skylux. You don't lose power by questioning power, he said in one clip. You gain humanity. Amber Collins, The Anatomy of Silence. Amber's journey was quieter, but no less painful. She wasn't the loudest voice that day. She hadn't barked commands. She hadn't made a scene. But she had stood there. And said nothing. That was the part that kept her awake at night. She had watched the injustice. She had felt it in her gut. But she hadn't acted. Fear makes cowards of kind people, she said during her testimonial. But cowardice, when left unchecked, turns into harm. Her role in the Second Chance program involved mentoring younger flight staff, especially WOM, on how to speak up even in hierarchical systems. She now taught a module called The Power of the Quiet No, helping staff recognize that silence is often interpreted as assent, and that refusing complicity is a form of courage. One trainee asked her during a session, "How do you know when to intervene?" Her answer was simple. When it feels wrong in your stomach, that's already too late. You should have moved the moment your soul said, "This isn't fair." Captain Blake, From Cockpit to Classroom. Of the three, Richard Blake had the most to lose, and perhaps the most to teach. 30 years in aviation. Thousands of hours in the sky. A respected name in the pilot community. And yet, he had folded under pressure, hiding behind procedure while Derrick Cole was shamed off the plane. He hadn't shouted. He hadn't accepted a bribe. But he hadn't used his authority to stop it. And now, his legacy had been rewritten in less than 10 minutes of cowardice. When invited into the Second Chance initiative, he agreed only under one condition. Don't soften what I did. Don't make me the wise old man. Let them see how I failed, exactly as it happened. He now served as a recurring instructor in the Leadership Under Pressure module, where senior Skylux staff were trained not just on technical procedures, but ethical escalation, how to prioritize humanity over hierarchy. Justice without revenge. When asked by a journalist why he had allowed these people back into the company he helped reform, Derrick answered with words that later went viral. Justice that only punishes doesn't teach. It just replaces one wound with another. But justice that transforms. That's the kind that outlives us. He believed deeply that accountability without restoration becomes exile, and exile doesn't build systems, it just buries people under their shame. A new standard across the industry. The ripple effects extended beyond Skylux. Two other major airlines reached out to Novamind to implement similar training. Federal aviation boards began revisiting policies about recording rights and passenger treatment. Universities contacted Derrick to build case studies from the incident for law, ethics, and business students. Skylux's new tagline, written by a team of staff who had completed the Second Chance initiative, read, "Not just first class. First in integrity." Passengers noticed. Service improved. Minority travelers began sharing stories, not of harm, but of healing. A flight, reimagined. 6 months to the day from his removal, Derrick Cole boarded another Skylux flight. This time, there were no whispers. No raised brows. No tightened smiles. He handed over his boarding pass. The attendant, newly trained, smiled and said, "Welcome aboard, Mr. Cole. Thank you for flying with us." He smiled back. "Thanks for having me." He walked down the aisle and took his seat. 2A. The same seat. But a different airline. And a different world. For most of the world, the story of Derrick Cole ended with a triumph. The viral takedown. The firing of corrupt staff. The suspension of an airline's entire fleet. The launch of a reform initiative that shook an industry. In media headlines, he was a hero. In corporate circles, he was a disruptor. In social media, he was an icon. But behind the closed doors of his office, away from the cheering crowds and viral applause, Derrick Cole sat in stillness, exhausted, not from the fight, but from what came after it. The cost of dignity. When Derrick looked at himself in the mirror weeks after the last press conference, he didn't see victory. He saw fatigue. Not in the eyes. Not in the posture. But in the soul. There's something the cameras don't capture, the emotional erosion that comes when every step forward requires resistance, when your dignity must be defended like property at a border. Even after justice was served, even after truth prevailed, he found himself waking up some nights, heart pounding, remembering not the confrontation, but the look on Charlotte Hayes' face, the forced politeness of Amber Collins, and the condescending eyes of Logan Pierce. He wasn't haunted by fear. He was haunted by familiarity. How many times has this happened to someone without a phone? Without a billion-dollar company? Without proof? He had power. But what about the millions who didn't? That question became the seed of his next mission. The Legacy Foundation. 2 months after the Second Chance initiative had been successfully implemented, Derrick founded a new entity. The Legacy Foundation. Unlike Novamind, which focused on systems and structures, Legacy would focus on people. Specifically, those who had endured unjust treatment in public or professional spaces and lacked the means or voice to challenge it. The foundation had 3 pillars. Documentation, offering legal and technical support to help marginalized individuals collect, store, and share evidence when discrimination occurred. Restoration, funding therapy, emotional care, and community healing programs for victims of institutional bias. Voice, creating publishing and speaking opportunities for everyday people who had faced injustice but never got to tell their stories. But Derrick didn't want to run it from a boardroom. He wanted to meet the people. Faces without headlines. His first stop wasn't a tech convention or media interview. It was a small high school in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, where a 15-year-old black boy named Isaiah had been suspended for defiance after correcting a teacher who wrongly stated that slaves were treated fairly because they were fed and housed. Isaiah had no lawyer. No publicist. No TikTok campaign. Just a grandmother who believed in his voice, and had emailed the Legacy Foundation through a link shared on Facebook. Derrick sat with Isaiah under the shade of a tree behind the school building. No cameras. Just conversation. "You spoke up," Derrick said. "And they punished you." Isaiah nodded. "They said I was being disruptive. But I was just telling the truth." "That's what they always say," Derrick replied. "Truth makes systems feel unsafe." He paused. "Keep speaking." Legacy funded Isaiah's legal appeal, hired a historian to work with the school, and by semester's end, Isaiah's suspension was removed from his record. More importantly, the school introduced a revised Black history curriculum voluntarily. Healing, not just winning. Back in Chicago, Derrick began meeting quietly with service workers, those who faced daily microaggressions from customers and managers alike. Hotel staff. Retail workers. Drivers. What he learned startled him more than any courtroom or cabin confrontation. Most of them didn't want revenge. They just wanted dignity restored. A Latina hotel housekeeper named Rosa told him, "I don't want them fired. I want them to know my name when I pass them in the hallway." A Muslim rideshare driver named Tariq shared, "I don't need an apology. I need them to stop asking if I have explosives in my trunk." From those encounters, Derrick shaped Legacy's listening circles, monthly, small group sessions in which people shared stories of indignity in safe spaces, then co-designed solutions tailored to their environments. The woman who came back. One day, months after the Skylux scandal had settled, Derrick received a short, handwritten note delivered to Novamind's lobby. It read, "You probably hate me. You have every right to. But I'm learning. And I wanted you to know. I'm not the same person who whispered, 'First class has standards.' Signed, Charlotte Hayes. He sat with the letter for a long time. Not because he felt sympathy, but because he felt curiosity. Could someone like Charlotte change? Not for the cameras. Not for court. But for herself. He invited her to speak, not publicly, but privately, to a group of second-chance participants. She came. Unstyled. Unbranded. Unscripted. And when she stood in front of that room, facing Logan, Amber, and others, she didn't excuse her actions. She didn't defend her upbringing. She simply said, "I thought class meant class. Those expensive seats meant expensive souls. I was wrong. I didn't just disrespect a man. I disrespected a system I never took time to understand. And I don't deserve forgiveness. But I'm here to earn awareness." She left the room in tears. But something stayed behind. A fracture in the wall. A crack where the light gets in. The conference that changed everything. 6 months later, Derrick Cole was invited to be the closing speaker at the Global Ethics in Technology Conference, ironically, the very event he had been flying to the day he was removed. This time, he arrived on stage to a standing ovation. He waited for the applause to settle, then stepped to the microphone with his familiar grace. "When systems break, they often don't make a sound," he began. "They don't shatter like glass. They crack quietly. In tone. In gaze. In policy." He shared his story, not with fire, but with focus. He talked about Isaiah. About Rosa. About Charlotte. He ended with a message not of anger, but of inheritance. We don't fight for justice because we enjoy the battle. We fight because we want our children to be able to sit, without question, in the seat they earned. Whether that's seat 2A or seat 99C. Whether that's a boardroom chair or a stool in a classroom. We fight not so they remember our names, but so they forget the feeling of having to explain who they are just to be allowed to exist. The hall went silent. Then the standing ovation returned, not out of admiration, but out of alignment. A quiet morning after all the storm. The next day, Derrick sat alone at a cafe window, watching people walk by, passengers, workers, parents, tourists. No one recognized him. And he didn't mind. Because legacies aren't always built through thunder. Sometimes they grow in silence. In changed minds. In open doors. In fewer apologies. In more room. There is a moment, often invisible to the world, when a story stops being about what happened and becomes about what remains. Not the viral clip. Not the courtroom silence. Not even the boardroom decisions. But the quiet aftermath. The slow rebuilding. The choice to be different when no one's watching. 6 months after being unjustly removed from seat 2A, Derrick Cole found himself walking through the very airport where it had all happened. No entourage. No media. Just him. There were no stares this time. No whispered judgments. The staff at Skylux Airlines, now completely retrained, offered the same courteous tone to every passenger. And it wasn't forced. It was practiced. Real. A young gate agent, perhaps in her early 20s, glanced at Derrick's ticket, then up at his face. She paused, not with suspicion, but recognition. "Mr. Cole. I just wanted to say, thank you. You changed everything here." He smiled, humbled. "We changed it. Together." The transformation of Skylux had not been cosmetic. It had been structural. From rewritten training modules to revised hiring policies, from how they logged complaints to how they resolved them, the airline now measured dignity, not just efficiency. And passengers noticed. More importantly, so did employees. They no longer feared losing their jobs for doing the right thing. They were rewarded for it. The culture of silence had been replaced by the courage of speech. The last flight. On the anniversary of his original flight, Derrick boarded a Skylux aircraft once more, not as a test, not as a symbol. Just as a man heading home. He took the same seat, 2A. As he settled in, he heard footsteps approach. A familiar voice spoke gently. "Mind if I say something?" He looked up. Captain Richard Blake. No longer in uniform, but in a Skylux blazer, now serving in executive training oversight. Derrick nodded. "Of course. I just wanted you to know. I review the footage of that day every week. Not because I enjoy it, but because it reminds me where cowardice lives. It wasn't in the shouting. It was in the silence. Mine." Derrick held his gaze. Then said softly, "You showed up afterward. That matters more than what happened before." Blake smiled, eyes misting. "Safe travels, sir." Moments later, a passenger took the seat beside Derrick, a woman, white, mid-40s, with a leather-bound novel in her hands. She looked at him, a bit sheepish. "This might sound strange," she began, "but I was on the same flight last year. I watched it all happen. I didn't record. I didn't speak up. I just sat there." He said nothing, letting the silence hold her words. "It's bothered me since. Not because I didn't go viral. But because I had a chance to make a difference and I didn't." He finally responded, kindly. "Maybe. Or maybe you just needed time to become someone who would." She looked relieved. And grateful. The real victory. The true triumph of Derrick Cole's journey wasn't the firings. Or the rebranding. Or even the restoration of his dignity. It was what he refused to become. He never became bitter. Never weaponized his pain. Never used his power to humiliate. He chose transformation over retaliation. And because he did, others followed. Logan Pierce now leads internal ethics audits for 2 airlines. Amber Collins had published a guide for frontline workers on how to speak the truth with tact. Captain Blake mentored young pilots on empathy in leadership. Charlotte Hayes, after months of counseling and reflection, had begun speaking to corporate leaders about how entitlement blinds us to our humanity. But more than all of that, the boy named Isaiah, whose voice had once been punished in a school hallway in Baton Rouge, had just been named class president. In his acceptance speech, he quoted Derrick Cole. "Justice is not the removal of bad people. It's the arrival of better choices. Where justice grows. Some stories end with applause. Others with verdicts. And, with silence. But this one? It ends with a garden. Because what Derrick Cole planted wasn't a rebellion. It was a seed. A seed of courage. Of quiet strength. Of legacy. And now, it grows, every time someone says, this isn't right. Every time a worker refuses to look away. Every time a leader listens. Every time a child is believed. Justice doesn't land with a crash. It lands like a plane, slow, deliberate, and guided by unseen hands that refuse to let it fall. The story of Derrick Cole is more than just a fight for personal justice. It is a powerful reflection on the strength of dignity, wisdom, and compassion in the face of injustice. In a world where prejudice often hides behind politeness or professional titles, what matters most is not reacting with anger, but standing firm with quiet integrity. From being wrongfully removed from his first-class seat, Derrick turned adversity into a catalyst for system-wide change. He didn't just restore his dignity, he opened the door for others, even those who had once wronged him, to learn, grow, and make amends. The lesson here is profound. Justice is not just about punishment, it's about transformation. And forgiveness is not weakness, it's a deeper form of strength. For those who have ever stayed silent in the face of unfairness, this story reminds us that it's never too late to speak up. No matter your age, you still have the power to influence your surroundings, to inspire others, and to help build a fairer world. If you believe in fairness, compassion, and the kind of courage that creates lasting change, please like, share this story with someone who needs it, and subscribe to this channel. Together, we can continue spreading hope, wisdom, and dignity, one story at a time.